Washington beats Texas 37-31, spoiling Texas's college football playoff debut, the one and only time that they make it in. Washington advances to the national championship. Michael Penix, absolutely sensational, over 400 yards, 2 touchdowns, one of the lowest sack rates in college football at 8.1%. The left-handed phenom. And I'm left-handed, so I by default love Michael Penix. And the fact that he plays very great football at this point in his career, it's just going to be a plus. It was a reason I was a big fan of Tua. Very elusive, very smart, very great at Alabama. And you're left-handed, you're definitely going to have my support. But Michael Penix is the absolute real deal, and it is going to be a blast watching him play in the national championship. Final numbers of 430 yards, 2 touchdowns. PFF actually credited him in this game with 6 big-time throws and 0 turnover-worthy plays. That's a lot to say because usually those big-time throws are going to be met by close interceptions. Maybe it was a tip, however it can possibly be perceived. I mean, you see him and his receivers dialing up big shots in this game. Romo Odunze. Lord, I'm having a hard time recalling some of the other players in this game for Washington, but it is one of the best wide receiver rooms that we've seen in college football. And knowing that Michael Penix was that Heisman Trophy runner-up and played like this, it makes you wonder how he's going to play in the national championship game. Now, it will be a step up for him to have to top this game, but even if he played 75 to 80%, and if it's any greater than that, Washington is very well in the driver's seat to win the national championship. I like Michael Penix over J.J. McCarthy, but let's keep it to this Washington and Texas game. Here we go. Jalen Polk had a 77-yard gain in this one. We also had Rome Odunze, like I mentioned. Even Jalen McMillan got in on the action. He had a 19-yard touchdown. Michael Penix just could not be flustered in this game. He was very elite. He was very concentrated. And it makes me excited to see what Michael Penix is going to be like as he gets into the NFL. He's one of the top quarterbacks in this draft, and knowing how he played in this stage, beating Bo Nix twice, and then going in and beating Quinn Ewers, while Arch Manning is also on the sideline, just a little insult to injury there for the Texas Longhorns, you have to give credit to it. You absolutely have to give credit to it with Kalen DeBoers, with Michael Penix, with that wide receiver room. Now, the defense is a little interesting. The Huskies defense surrenders 267 pass yards per game. It's the 11th worst mark in the FBS, and they've allowed 23 passing touchdowns. They even had Quinn Ewers' final 23 attempts in the game, 216 yards, a 41-yard completion to Jordan Whittington on the final drive. But Washington's secondary also has 16 interceptions this year. You got Jabbar Muhammad. Of course, Elijah Jackson came up with a great play when he swatted it away from A.D. Mitchell. Really miss him playing for Georgia. He's been crazy for the Longhorns, and he has scored in every single college football playoff game that he's been in. But you're kind of curious about these last couple of plays that were ran by Texas in this football game. The Longhorns had the ball at the 12-yard line, 15 seconds left, and all they needed was a touchdown. But the Texas offense dialed up a swing pass to Jaden Blue that lost a yard, took 5 seconds off the clock. A.D. Mitchell had just made one of the best catches of the season on a nice back shoulder fade just in the drive before to make it a one-score game. And then Xavier Worthy, who is an absolute speedster, doesn't necessarily get the best play drawn up for him, or even those guys included, for them to be able to take shots at the end zone. Now, Texas has really waited for this chance to get into the college football playoffs and ultimately cement their place, as everybody was geeking over them beating Oklahoma State, and rightfully so. But the last few play calls from Texas just really leave an odd taste in your mouth, especially when you know that Steve Sarkisian is the guy, behind it as well. Michael Penix is just absolutely unstoppable at this point. 6th-year senior, carved up the Longhorns all night. But you also see that, again, I mentioned earlier, Texas as well. 10 penalties for 66 yards, 7 of those being drive extending for Texas and drive ending for Washington as well. So you saw that they had some double-edged penalties here for them and, against them. Texas only came into the game averaging about 50 yards of penalties, 6 penalties average per game. They almost doubled that up on the penalties with 10 and only about 16 more yards with the 66 yards in penalties. Jalen Polk and O'Dunes actually both go over 100 yards in this game with Michael Penix, but the penalties were just so bad. So bad for Texas. And I hate to keep bringing those up, but when something as simple as discipline in a football game is going to exclude you from a big win, it's going to get talked about. People like me are going to get up here on their show and they're going to talk about how the simple things that you couldn't put together is a possible reason why you're sitting at home. And I liked Washington coming into this game. I originally had Texas winning this after we saw the matchups about a month ago when the college football playoff rankings came out. But then as we got closer, I'm like, Michael Penix. I like the way Kalen DeBoer has coached a little more this year. Now, I like Sark over Kalen DeBoer, but Michael Penix has already beaten Bo Nix twice. He'd had his work cut out for him in other games this year. So this game here for Washington was a big one. Of course it was. It was the game to get to the national championship, but they stepped up to the occasion. They did what they had to do. They did what they had to do, and that's why they're able to be here in the first place in the national championship. But the injury at the end of the game with Dylan Johnson, you see people all over Twitter saying, "Oh, damn, that injury timeout for can really come back and hurt Washington," because we saw Texas driving down the field at the end of the game to possibly go on and win it. A touchdown would have tied it, an extra point would have won it for them. But we see Washington had the chance to run the game into the final seconds. It was kind of taken away because of an injury to running back Dylan Johnson. Felt kind of weird because the Huskies weren't running unnecessarily. A first down would have stopped Texas from getting the ball back. They were supposed to be running the ball, grinding out the clock, playing that smart football because you're in a playoff game. You're trying to go to the national championship, And the offense it was just a little weird because not the offense. Let me take my words back. The idea that certain rules can create exceptions for 10-second runoffs, it can kind of incentivize players to maybe fake injuries or to even have, I'm just keeping it at that. Players to fake injuries to possibly get the clock to stop and also for a 10-second runoff as well. I didn't necessarily like how that played out. Thankfully, it didn't come back and bite Texas, but everyone was kind of biting their nails at the end of that game, wondering what was necessarily going to play out because the Huskies go from having the ball with 50 seconds left on third down to playing defense with 41 seconds left because they lost one of their best offensive players. Just kind of felt unfair. But again, hindsight 2020, Washington beats Texas 37-31 to advance to the national championship. The national championship will be next Monday. I'll be predicting that game on this Friday show, episode 59. And also Michigan beats Alabama 27-20 in overtime. We will have Michigan and we will have Washington, the first and second best teams in college football, squaring off for the national championship in the final year of the 4-year CFP format. And that's how it should be. Get in the chat, get in the comments. Let me know what you're feeling about college football so far this year. Who do you have winning the national championship game? Did you expect the outcomes to be any different?